If you live in River State or its environs, you may have heard the statement Ogoni oil resumption by now, because that word has become a buzzword today. But for those who may not know, and those who may have heard it or maybe hearing it for the first time, a lot of questions will be going through your mind as to why oil resumption. Was there oil activity before? Why did it stop? Why resumption now? Why the desperation now? Why is the federal government so adamant and keen on oil exploration in Ogoni right now? Why is the seeming loyalty and love from the federal government to the people of Ogoni, who was once massacred in the year 1993 to 1995? So, a whole lot of questions will be going through your mind. And for those who may not know, those who were born within the 2000s, who may have not been abreast with the history of the Ogoni people and the federal government and the oil activities, if you stick around a little bit longer, perhaps I'll do my best to explain all the why. And I'll take my time to explain the brief history or give historical facts and information between the Ogonis and the federal government, and why the desperation and the urgency from the federal government to try to re-enter Ogoni land to prospect for oil, which was once nicknamed the Black Gold. Thank you. Once again, you're welcome to the Truth That Heals from the Empty Rant. My name is Comrade Solomon Lenu, and I'm here to give you the truth about the situation of the Ogoni people. Well, before I go into that, for the benefit of those who may not be aware of the Ogoni situation as regards to oil exploration, Ogoni was the second place where oil was struck in commercial quantity in Nigeria in the year 1958. And for over 3 decades, Ogoni continued to contribute a significant amount of crude oil, which was the mainstay of the Nigeria economy and still is the mainstay of the Nigeria economy till today for that period of time. But in the year 1993, problem ensued when the Ogoni people protested and demanded for the oil major Shell BP to leave the land because of the actions that they were taking against the people of Ogoni, which they did not like. Of course, a human rights activist, the late Ken Saro-Wiwa, led the peaceful protest by the Movement for the Survival of Ogoni People, MOSOP, against the Shell BP and the federal government of Nigeria. To an extent, it became an international acclaimed protestation that led to the eviction of Shell from Ogoni land. And of course, that did not go down so well with the military junta at the time, General Sani Abacha, who framed up Ken Saro-Wiwa and his kingsmen and then put them in a military tribunal where they were convicted and sentenced to death by hanging. And on November 10th, 1995, they were summarily executed, to the dismay and the condemnation of the entire world. Of course, as a fallout of that, Nigeria was suspended from the Commonwealth of Nations and from many other international organizations, for a very long time until democracy returned back in 1999. That being said, the issue here today is, after 33 long years of stoppage of oil exploration in Ogoni land, why the urgency? Why now? Right now, the federal government, under the leadership of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, is doing everything humanly possible to re-enter the Ogoni lands to prospect and explore their oil. And as we speak today, there seems to be some level of desperation from the side of the government, although many people, had adjudged this desperation to be love for the Ogoni people, or some are saying to be sympathy for the Ogoni people for what had happened to them in the past. According to the word of the president, he said that he and the Ogoni people were comrades in the struggle, and of course, it is only right that the Ogoni questions be answered and the Ogoni issues be addressed. But I can tell you here today, without mincing word, that there are a lot than just the love and concern as been stated by the Nigerian government. Of course, successive governments from 1999 had been trying to re-enter into Ogoni land to resume oil exploration right from the Obasanjo's administration. He tried and couldn't succeed. The Jonathan administration didn't quite pay much attention to that. Of course, the Buhari administration took it a notch higher in trying to ensure that the oil exploration was resumed in Ogoni land. And he did a lot of things to show his seriousness. For example, the cleanup of Ogoni land as recommended by UNEP, and of course, he took that bold step and initiative as a way, to build confidence in the Ogoni people that, the federal government was ready, to answer their questions and to, meet them at the crossroad and then to find a lasting solution to their problem. But of course, the issue of Ogoni and the federal government with regards to oil exploration was an issue that claimed the lives of over 2,000 human beings and even the best of a generation of leadership of the people of Ogoni. And it was an issue that attracted international involvement, and as such was not an issue that the government of Nigeria could use their fiat, or their power, to move into Ogoni land without the proper consent of the Ogoni people. And as such, it is an issue that requires a lot of lobbying and a lot of roundtable discussion, which the President Buhari's administration could not meet up before, his tenure, elapsed. Then came the government of Bola Ahmed Tinubu, who had done everything humanly possible to show his seriousness. In fact, as at today, as we speak, there is something called the confidence building measures that the federal government actually, presented to the Ogoni people, that whatever you want, that you think that we can do to make you believe that we are sorry for what has happened and we are serious, to rekindle our partnership, we are going to do it. And of course, you could see the Federal University of Environment and Technology, which by all ramification is one of the fastest approved university to have taken off in the history of this country, because of course, just over a year after it was approved, lectures had commenced and so many other things too. But the primary question is, why the desperation? Why is the federal government hell bent on returning back to Ogoni land to drill oil? Well, the question is simple, but not that easy, but a lot more deeper. Well, if you recall, you understand that on May 29, 2023, when President Bola Ahmed Tinubu took over office, many people may not know, but Buhari left a wreckage of a country for President Tinubu. President Tinubu took over bits and pieces of the destruction that the Buhari administration left behind for him. And of course, when he came into office as someone who has prided himself as Mr. Fix-It, as a global and world acclaimed strategist who had, all the magic wand to make Nigeria work based on the criticisms that he has been making while he was on the sideline, it became very obvious to the current administration that they had to do something drastic if they could, get things together and then at least try their best to, present something, tangible to the Nigerians whom they had given a lot of promises. Of course, when Tinubu took over, Nigeria was heavily in debt. In fact, it is said that the Buhari's administration took a loan of over 8 billion US dollar, almost 9 billion US dollar, and used the most precious and the most important commodity which the economy of Nigeria depends upon, which is the crude oil, as the collateral for getting those loans. So Under the Buhari's administration, they entered into what is called the Forward Sale Finance Facility, or the crude backed loan, where they used the crude oil that hasn't even been explored to take loan from creditors to the tune of over 8 billion US dollars. And under that arrangement, you had what they call Project Gazelle, you have Project Yield, you have Project Leopard, and so many other nicknames and pseudonyms under which those loans were taken. And the NMPC actually supervised the collection of those loans. And of course, the Tinubu administration came in heavily laden with a lot of tax or debt repayment from the wreckage, caused by the previous administration. In fact, to put it in proper, context, the Buhari's administration actually destroyed this country to a point never imagined, although a lot of Nigerians who don't look beyond the surface didn't understand what was going on. This country was so wrecked to a point that in finding solution, the administration of Buhari had to go to print over 30 trillion naira and offloaded it into the economy, which caused a hyperinflation that the country was grappling with even before he left. And these were all the issues that the Tinubu's administration has been battling with, since, he came on board, and it hasn't been easy. To even put it, more clearer, the 2025 budget was about 54 point something trillion naira, out of which a whooping 14.3 trillion, about $5.21 billion went into debt financing. And remember, out of this 54.9 trillion that was the budget for 2025, about 13.08 trillion was a budget deficit, meaning it was the part of the budget that Nigeria was going to finance through loans, because the economy at the time could not accommodate all of the money from the proceed or the projected proceed from oil and other sources of revenue. And to even explain further how bad it is, or how bad it was, we're paying a debt of about 14.3 trillion, whereas in the same budget, we also had a budget deficit of about 13.08 trillion, meaning while we were paying 14.3 trillion, we were expected to borrow another 13, point something trillion, which is to say that our situation did not quite change. To even make it more succinctly, to even put a more exposition on the situation of Nigeria's economy, which is the reason why the Tinubu's administration is doing everything to return back to Ogoni land. The budget for 2024 has not been fully implemented. The budget for 2025 was not implemented at all, because it was even less than 20% implementation, and even that of 2023. That's to tell you that in the year 2026, now that I'm recording this, we have a budget of 3 cycles that had not been completely implemented. In fact, that of 2025, most people had said that has not been implemented at all. But then, where goes the monies? Well, what this means is that as of today, a whole lot is happening with the economy and the finances, of Nigeria. In fact, a lot of persons have said that the 272,500 barrels of oil that is claimed to have been the amount of oil that is pledged for the loan money that was taken. Some people are saying that no, that it is actually more than that. And two, for you to even understand what is happening, as at today, despite all the effort that the Tinubu's government has put in trying to rev up, oil production, we still don't meet up the OPEC quota, which is 1.5 million barrels, per day. As we speak, while I'm recording this now, Nigeria is hovering around 1.3 to 1.4 million barrels per day. And then if you now take away the 172,500 barrels that goes for the servicing of the loans that were taken under the Buhari's government, you discover that we are left with maybe just a paltry 1 million barrels of oil. And out of that 1 million barrels of oil, this current administration had also taken its own loan, which is different from the one that he inherited. And all of these loans requires repayment. And as we speak, this government, one thing that we must give to them is that the government is very ambitious in trying to make a statement or trying to leave a mark or make good her promises, and they are seriously suffering or grappling with paucity of funds, even though a lot of persons may not understand. As we speak today, our recurrent expenditure takes a huge chunk of our national budget because the cost of governance in Nigeria is quite expensive, and a lot goes into recurrent expenditure. So by the time you remove the money for loan repayments, by the time you remove recurrent expenditure, the government is left with little or nothing to execute capital projects that can actually drive Nigeria to that point where Nigeria will actually, be among the committee of states or nations where transformation is happening as expected. So today, that's the reason why you can see the reform, that the president is trying to make in the tax sector. That's the reason also why they are doing everything to return back to Ogoni. Remember also that before Ogoni oil production was shut down, Ogoni was producing about 150,000 barrels per day. Some people say it was much higher than that, but that was the official numbers or figures that was given out. And if you multiply the 50,000 barrels, which of course by now must have doubled, because of course there were a lot of areas in Ogoni that had been mapped for exploration that hadn't been explored before the whole crisis began. So definitely from other seismic studies too that had been done, it is said that Ogoni area can actually produce close to 500,000 barrels of oil per day, because it is a rich belt that has a lot of oil and gas reserve in Nigeria. So for instance, if Ogoni oil resumption actually happens and Nigeria is taking, let's just put it at 150,000 barrels per day at the current oil benchmark for this year, which is about 64 0.85 that means that the Ogoni area will be giving the government of Nigeria almost about 15 billion naira on daily basis. And that is strategic wisdom and not law. So, for instance, the Tinubu's administration has checked if we can do what is necessary to pacify the Ogoni people so that we can re-enter into Ogoni land to start operation and start exploring oil. If we can get even as little, as the 150,000 barrels per day, we shall be able to, be raking in almost a 15, billion naira per day from the Ogoni area. And then what has the federal government done? Or what will it cost us to be able to get these people to buy in? Perhaps a federal university, which its funding will not, even be up to the amount that the federal government will be recovering or will be making on daily basis from the oil, in the Ogoni area, and maybe perhaps some fringe things like maybe construction or renovation of or paving of roads and all of those things, which are quite menial. So the Tinubu's administration has sat down and looked at the indices, looked at the numbers, and they have understood that look, Nigeria is losing quite a lot for not exploring oil in Ogoni area. So why can't we throw a little carrot, to them, get them to buy in, and then we go back to Ogoni and begin to, explore, and drill out this black gold that has been left dormant for over 30 years today. So it is a strategic wisdom, not because the federal government loves Ogoni, not because they feel sympathetic to the pains or plights of the Ogoni, but because of their own advantage. And remember, government will not do anything for you except for two reasons. One, for the consequences of not doing that thing for you, and two, for what they will get for doing that which they are doing for you. And in the case of this Ogoni oil exploration and oil re-entry, it is the second option that the government of Nigeria is playing by. What they would get, for doing whatever, it takes, for the Ogonis to accept them back into Ogoni. And therefore, Ogoni people need to be very, very careful, very, very strategic, very, very objective now, much more than ever, so that they will not, fall into the or into the temptation of first time that the federal government came into Ogunland, when there were no proper agreements, no proper MOUs or understanding between the government and the people because of lack of knowledge of what was obtainable at the time. Time has changed now. We have a lot of intelligent people, a lot of intelligent leaders. The youths are very vibrant. Therefore, the Ogoni people needs to be very, very strategic, be very, very, careful in negotiating with the government right now, because if they don't get it right this time, they may not be able to have the attention of the world like they did back in the early 90s in today's world. Right now, the world is moving so fast, things are happening at astronomical, speed. And sometimes if the Ogoni begins to cry, the world may not be able to listen, or even if they listen, they may not be able to do enough or do a lot, because there is a lot going on in the world already. Therefore, Ogonis must be strategic. And this is also the reason why they need to be strategic. What the Ogoni is holding today is as valuable as gold, if not more. As we speak, there is one lie or one fable that the Conference on Climate Change had been churning out year after year, the myth of the energy transition from fossil fuel to green energy, and all how, in a few years' time, the crude oil, regime was going to be over. People were going to do away with crude oil and all of those things and all of that, which was one of the things that pressured the Ogonis, or has been pressuring the Ogoni people into accepting, the offers of the federal government. Although I also agree, I also accept that it's time that they start oil exploration, but then it should be on an objective basis. It should not be because they are pressured by one myth or the other, which does not hold water, like the myth of energy transition from fossil fuel to green energy. Because the war in Iran had shown that the world and the industrialization of the global West and all the world power has made it very, very clear that the world is not ready, not today, not tomorrow, not in the next 30 years, not in the next 50 years, to do away with crude. Therefore, the narrative that green energy had come and then crude will be of less value in few years from now is a myth and a hocus pocus that has been promoted by people who have an agenda. And the Ogoni people should understand that, because if you understand that, it will enable you to take proper time and care in negotiating with the federal government. As we speak today, the artificial intelligence swarm depends heavily on energy from the fossil fuel. The blockchain farms that are built everywhere that consumes a lot of power depends heavily on the energy, from fossil fuel and crude and all of that, and plus various other innovations across the world that moves, or that technological advancement depends upon, needs the energy that comes from crude oil. So nobody should tell you that in the nearest future that energy transition, is going to make crude oil to be obsolete, and thereby making you, to go into any hasty discussion or negotiation. Yes, I agree that there is an ongoing effort to transit from fossil fuel to green energy with the complaint about the ozone layer depleting and all of those things. Yes, we've heard all of that, but it is not something that is happening in the next 50 years that will warrant, people, to start fidgeting about, their oil. The war in Iran has shown us right now that this war depends heavily on crude, and that's the reason why, you know, anybody who has crude is considered very important. Some people have said that the battle in Iran is predicated upon, cutting the Chinese industrialization to size by starving them of the monopoly, the oil monopoly that they have been playing in the Middle East and other parts of Northern America. So, as we speak today, that has been laid to rest. So, I believe that I've been able to answer a little bit of why Nigeria and this administration is doing everything humanly possible to try to return back to Ogoni land, to try to rev up, production, because if they do succeed to get back to Ogoni, of course, the federal government will be making a decent amount of money that, can help in their development. But like I said, it is important for the Ogoni people to be on their guard, because this is the right time for them to use their God-given wealth to actually better their own life. Of course, we understand that in the Constitution of Nigeria, any natural resources below the ground belongs to the federal government, but the people also have what they call the surface right, where you must seek the consent of the people before you enter into their environment to mine whatever you will mine. Yes, it belongs to the federal government according to our laws, but the people also have their inalienable rights, of consultation, and you do not have, the powers, for forced entry into the environment of the people. So these are more, intricacies around this situation. And one last thing too that I want to say is that as of today, there are divergent, opinion and views across Ogoni land. There are those who are saying that it's long overdue. There are those who are saying that no, it shouldn't be. There are those too who are saying that look, no proper discussion has been made. Of course, we learned that the federal government instructed the leaders to go home and meet the people, which necessitated leadership to create what they call the dialogue committee that went across the six kingdoms of Ogoni to discuss with the people, and then took the views of the people back to the president and the federal government. After that was done, up to this moment as we speak, nobody has heard anything, again from the presidency or the leaders who had been interfacing with the presidency. And remember, we were told that the actual negotiation for oil resumption had not begun, that what they were doing is just what is called the confidence building measures. And after the confidence building measure and the Ogoni people had, accepted and had given their buy-in, then the federal government will come down and begin to discuss with the Ogoni people. As we speak today, that has not been done. Rather, a lot of rumors, has been going around, and things like that is only a recipe, for confusion and chaos if it is not properly handled. So, as we speak today, it is important and expedient for the Ogoni people to know what is happening, for them to know why the government of Nigeria is very desperate to come back to their land. And it is also important for the Ogoni people to be on their guard, to know the value of what they have, and to also understand that if they miss it this time, they've missed it forever. So it is important for us to arm ourselves with all of this knowledge and understanding so that we can better, prepare ourselves. And Nigeria, I wish you luck. Of course, this government, is going through so much, and I hope and wish that there could have been, a way that this government would have found the resources that they need to do what they want to do, because Nigeria actually needs development. There are a lot of developmental and infrastructural deficit, in our country today that needs a lot of money, to actually rev up. And I hope that they are coming to Goni actually help them, to get that if they eventually succeed. So, like I always say, we are doing this just to educate the people of Nigeria, not because we are prejudiced by anybody or by any means. But like I always say, corruption buried in secret destroys a nation. Truth motivates, truth elevates, and above all, truth heals. If you've not subscribed to this channel, please do so so that you always get the early update whenever we publish a new episode on the truth that heals from the empty rant. I remain yours in the struggle, Comrade Solomon Lenu. Thank you so much, and God bless you.